building the business case. If you want to go to the table of contents, please, next slide. And I'm going to talk about, okay, so what is a business case? First of all, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. There's probably a variety of different levels of expertise in the audience here. I want to present some ideas about what goes into the business case and potential framework you could use. What are the different sources of value that you want to look at when building the business case for your retrofit? That'll spend a lot of time there. I'll briefly go over some of the risks that you're going to want to look at and create some risk management plans for. And then finally, the importance of storytelling and being able to tell this in a compelling way to get stakeholder buy-in and ongoing support. Next slide, please. So what is a business case? Essentially, it's some sort of presentation document that usually is there to seek funding or approval for some sort of activity, initiative, or project. And it's essentially, it ties together the proposed investment or initiative to the strategic context that you're in, and it provides the information you need to really make an informed decision of how to move forward. The business case will also become the template and basically the baseline from which ongoing performance is evaluated. Were you successful in your retrofit? Did the outcomes get achieved? And do you need to make any changes or course adjustments thereafter? In terms of what goes in or what kind of framework, there's a lot of different frameworks you can use. I've put one up here that is actually from the Government of Canada for internal business case approvals. But for your specific context, you want to look at if your organization already has a preferred framework. More importantly, do your funding organizations, or if you're a social housing provider and you have an administrative agreement with one of the municipalities or regions, do they have a framework? Again, who's your audience? Is it for approval? Is it for funding? And you want to basically craft this in such a way that is easy for them to digest. So in terms of this framework, this is, again, the Government of Canada's framework. And essentially it has 3 phases in building the business case. So the first one is really just like, what are your organizational needs and what are the outcomes that you're looking to achieve? This is really a planning session where you really understand kind of the strategic environment, the needs, and kind of defining your scope. Phase 2 is really then about taking that and developing your options, evaluating those options, and then creating a recommendation. I'm not going to go through each of the specific bullet points on the slide. The slides will be available for reference, but I'll just speak to the high level. So obviously in putting your preliminary options together, you're looking at, okay, what's my evaluation criteria? What's the art of the possible? In evaluating them, you want everything from your costs to your risks, the understanding the policy, any rules or regulations that you have to follow, and then also an implementation plan, your capacity to do so, and some of your risk management plans. Coming out of the recommendation, your phase 3 is actually managing the implementation, and then making sure that again, that you're achieving what you would set out to achieve, and doing any kind of performance measurement or change management as needed as you go on. Deep retrofits we're looking at can go anywhere. The range of benefits or value that you're trying to capture in your deep retrofit could be a 5-year program. It could be a 30-year program. So the continual performance management and reevaluation is a really critical aspect, and you'll hear more about that from the other speakers as we go on. Next slide, please. So just to kind of place this in your mind of where does this fit into the process, it's not always first in the process, but the reason why we put it first in this morning session is because it is a planning document and it is a planning exercise. So it's good to understand where does this fit. And as you go through each kind of stage in the retrofit, you kind of think through a lens of, okay, how does this fit into my business plan and what do I need to think about? So in the retrofit process, there's usually some sort of problem, some sort of, something you're trying to solve. And often it's a trigger event, and I'll talk more about that in the next slide. And then as you decide that, hey, we're going to undertake a retrofit to solve this problem, then you need to do a bunch of data collection. And so this is where you do your energy audits, your building condition assessments, looking at your maintenance, look at your operational records, tenant complaints, things like that. And So, gather that information. That all goes into then actually building the business case. So your key performance indicators, do your scenario analysis. Where's the money coming from? That's always an important topic, a large reason why people are here today. I have a special kind of financing and funding presentation in tomorrow's session. And then, of course, your risk management and performance management plans. Once your business case gets approved, then you're going into your implementation and commissioning, and then your ongoing validation and verification. I believe that in today and tomorrow, other than maybe the problem context, each of our speakers will be going through kind of in more detail how to tackle and some of the technical details and the processes needed under each of these stages. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so when it comes to building the retrofit business case, you can kind of think of it as kind of a waterfall of starting with, okay, what are the value creating triggers? So retrofits, and especially deep retrofits, become easier and more valuable when they're timed with certain events. And I have another slide on this, but for example, if you're going to be doing a retrofit where you're going to be taking off the facade, then you want to look at insulation. If you're going to be doing a retrofit where you're doing something in the mechanical room, are there add-on events or other components that you can include, because retrofits are disruptive, and so leveraging trigger events can create a lot of value. When you identify the trigger event, and again the problem that you're trying to solve, and then you go into estimating and proving the potential value that you see. So again, this goes into listing and quantifying or qualifying all the different sources of value. Then you've done that information gathering, you've quantified your value and you identified your risks. Of course, there's the funding plan. Who's going to pay for this? Where's it coming from? How are you monetizing these sources of value? That's always an interesting question, which I'll get into more. Once you have your funding plan in place, of course, any good funding plan, any good plan comes with a risk management plan, identifying those risks and really seeing how you're going to manage them. You'll see in our Wood Green case study, we spent a lot of time looking at the risks, and because it was a 30-year project, and understanding how to manage those over time. And then finally, as I said, the tell a good story. The tell a good story is really important. Deep retrofits, you're involving technical people, and Ian mentioned there's a lot of technical jargon. You're involving board members who may not be technical. You're involving financial people. You're involving maintenance people, operating people. So there's a lot of different disciplines that you're bringing together to pull together a deep retrofit. And each discipline and each person who has a role, not only do they need to buy in, but they really need to understand kind of what they're doing and how they're moving forward and what's expected of them. And then, putting that in a really concise way in a continual communications package is really critical for the success of your retrofit. And I can't underscore this enough. We spend a lot of time focused on the technical sides, the muddy sides, but the communication is really, 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 really critical for a variety of reasons that you'll see over the next 2 days. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we get into the fun stuff, a little more detail. So I talked about the identifying value creating triggers. So what is that? Well, it's the idea that a deep retrofit, costs can be significantly reduced and value can be significantly increased if you're going to mix it with these other kind of value creating triggers. So the idea is that if you're doing a major envelope replacement or major equipment replacement, this is an opportunity to include other measures. Regulations are changing quite often. We're seeing a tightening of building codes. We're seeing a tightening of GHG performance standards. Regulations as they change, if you have to meet them, again, another great time to look what else you can do as you're doing that intervention. Another value creating trigger is that if you own a portfolio of buildings, potentially you're undergoing an evaluation from an energy management point of view or from a GHG point of view, and you really go through a process of identifying kind of, what are the laggards in your building portfolio, what we call an energy hog. Focusing on that is often a good place to start if you're just starting your retrofit journey. It's very easy to get a lot of buy-in for those kind of projects. Another critical one is new acquisition or refinancing. If we're in the social housing context, actually in any building owner context, this is actually really, really important. There's a lot of balance sheet benefits is what I'll call them to your deep retrofit. So often people focus on the income statement or profit and loss benefits of, reduced expenses, but there's a lot of value to be unlocked based on your balance sheet. So those reduced expenses can increase the valuation of a building that you own and can allow you to unlock more capital at your refinancing of your mortgage because, you're doing a higher valuation, better loan to value, things like that. And so if you time your retrofit where you do it 2 years before your refinancing, you can incorporate all those better values to unlock more capital. So timing some things like that can actually create huge amount of value for your business case. Major occupancy changes. This is a little more common in the commercial space where you have anchor tenants leaving, but any kind of major occupancy change or building usage, this is another great opportunity again to look at what kind of building physical interventions and retrofits you can undertake. So those are some of the value creating triggers. And so again, the idea is that there are things happening in your building that will need to get replaced, and you're going to get better bang for your buck if you can stack them in terms of timing. Next slide, please. Okay, so the idea of what are the sources of value and how do you kind of measure them and put them in your business case? Well, we're used to talking about retrofits as physical interventions, so we're going to do stuff on our envelope, electrical, mechanical, we have all these retrofit measures on the left-hand side here. But those are just the physical interventions, and those are actually really neat, especially from some of the technologies that have come into play and how they interact. But ultimately, they're driving towards better building performance and measuring and monitoring, and if you can't quantitatively measure, then at least qualifying is really important, and it is really what's driving kind of your sources of value. So when I say building performance, we're looking at thermal comfort, for example. Every multifamily residential tenant I've spoken to always has some sort of complaint about a hallway is too cold, or there's some sort of thermal comfort issues, or the indoor environment. I'm getting smells from my neighbors across the hall all the time. Or on the kind of the negative side of that, when you look at indoor air quality, I'm sick all the time, or when I'm inside, I have increased allergies. So those are kind of building performance metrics. Of course, you have green building ratings or scores, which not only identify that your building is green, but can also lead to other sources of value. You also have beautification as part of your retrofit, which is also part of telling your story and also just getting buy-in. And then you also have other building performance measures like space efficiency and space flexibility and utilization. So what do I mean by that? I mean,
I just sent them actually. I shared some links. Yeah, so sometimes they don't look very obvious, but you can see those. Yeah.
We're getting some talk in the background. If you're going, please
can everyone please mute themselves?
There you go. No worries. So yeah, so technical jargon, space efficiency, space utilization, what does that mean? I was looking at, this was at a university where they implemented through their kind of building automation and control strategy. They started doing building occupancy evaluation. So, which classrooms were being used when. And what they found was that their booking system for this class being held at a certain time didn't necessarily reflect reality. Sometimes classes got canceled and that didn't get updated. And so through kind of occupancy monitoring, they were able to reuse spaces that were being underutilized, and it managed to avoid a multi-million-dollar investment in a new building because they thought they needed more space. And so the capital cost avoidance more than justified the kind of the increase in building automation and occupancy evaluation. So that's what I mean by space utilization and space efficiency. So all of these lead to both monetary benefits and non-monetary benefits, which you're going to try and capture in your business case. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through some of the different sources of value that you're going to want to include in your business case. You can see so this was taken from the Atmospherics Fund, the case for the deep retrofits. And you can see kind of, each of the monetary benefits, who is the one who benefits property owner, residents, community, and then whether it's an energy or non-energy benefit. So the first one is the easy one. It's the reduced utility bills. That's the easiest to capture, easiest to monitor. The second one that is quite common to look at is reduced maintenance costs. Reduced maintenance costs can be actually quite large, but you have to make sure that you've got a good maintenance program in place if you want to quantify them. So have you been tracking your service calls? Have you been tracking the maintenance work that's being done? Have you been tracking those kind of things so that you can actually create a baseline on that and then show improvement? If you can track that using some sort of digital means, some sort of way that is easy to verify, you actually may be able to find a way to monetize those future maintenance savings. So for example, we're working with a large logistics hub that has a parkade, and they're using metal halide lights in their parking lot on 24 hours a day. Those lights go out every 1 to 1.5 years. And so replacing all those lights is actually quite a big maintenance cost. You move to LED, we're looking at LED lights that have 10, 15-year lifespan. All of a sudden those maintenance costs go down. Well, we're looking at monetizing that difference in costs and actually increasing the retrofit by extending those savings. So that's kind of on the reduced expenses side. Then you start looking, as I said, at some of the the other kind of balance sheet benefits. So you can have increased rental income, either through reduced turnover or rental premiums for being in an energy efficient or green space, especially if you've combined some of those other sources of value in your energy efficiency retrofit. I'm not sure how many people have experienced a green building. There's a certain kind of pleasantness to it. You walk in, the air is fresher, there's a little more daylight. If you're combining those kind of efforts with your energy efficiency retrofit, then you're going to see bigger bang from your buck. You're going to see better response from your tenants, and that aha factor might actually lead to some of these value increases. Property value increases, of course, net operating income increases, resiliency increases, which we're starting to see being priced into the market from some of the institutional lenders. Potentially reduced insurance premiums. Ian mentioned the move towards water efficiency and stormwater management. Stormwater management is really, really critical. And what we're starting to see with some of the insurance premiums is that they're offering insurance premium reduction to building owners who do a lot of stormwater management, reduce the amount of paving, basically, allow more, better stormwater management, essentially. And I'm not sure if many of you follow kind of the insurance news. I know it's very exciting and all, but some of the condos right now are facing issues around even getting some of the flood risk insurance in certain locations. Another value that I mentioned is the avoided capital cost of repairs. I mentioned the multi-million-dollar building that the university got to avoid to build. The reduced critical system failures. This one is a little harder to measure, but especially if you have a kind of a benchmarking analysis of kind of what is performance of certain systems over time, you may be able to work with your insurance provider to monetize that in some way. Of course, then deep retrofits are a hedge against rapid escalation in energy or carbon prices. And we're getting to the point where the rapid escalation in carbon prices is going to make a big difference. And then, of course, there's different kind of financing mechanisms depending on what kind of value you unlock and kind of the depth of your retrofit. Again, I have a whole separate presentation on funding and financing tomorrow. Next slide, please. So some of the non-monetary benefits, of course, well, I guess I just said that this could be a monetary benefit. Reducing CO2 emissions is no longer just a thing that's better for the planet. It is now becoming something that is priced into the market. You can get better funding the deeper your retrofit, and you can avoid carbon taxes, and you can avoid future regulation. So reduction of carbon emissions is becoming an interesting and quickly changing landscape in terms of the value in the reduction of those emissions. Another one which has become especially interesting during COVID is the indoor environmental quality, particularly the indoor air quality. I believe I saw a quote that we spend about 90% of our lives indoors. And so even a marginal improvement in your indoor air quality can have a huge amount of value. And what we've seen and why this is exciting is over the last few years with obviously the focus on sanitization and tenant and occupant health and sickness is the importance of indoor air quality. But we've seen service providers really step up to the plate and now provide solutions that are quantifiable. I've seen service provider offer solutions for ventilation as a service, indoor air quality as a service, where they are guaranteeing certain levels of indoor air quality. Sensors and digital technology has come so far where that can be done in a cost-effective manner, and you can actually quantify and monitor and manage your indoor air quality on that basis. Next slide, please. So some of the non-monetary benefits, of course, and this especially goes into kind of thinking about your tenants, and you get into your social equity and improving the quality of life in Ontario's or Canada's low income and vulnerable populations who are going to be particularly vulnerable to increasing weather events, increasing heat events. So there's a huge amount of there's kind of an equity component in terms of helping the most vulnerable in our population. And then there are system benefits. I won't go through a lot of details of this, but as we retrofit our entire building stock, you see system benefits either in the electricity grid, in terms of property and insurance. There's a lot of non-monetary benefits. It's really important to capture these, especially if you're in a public policy context. So if you're social housing and you're trying to get your business case approved by the city or regional administrators, they also have a public policy mandate. A lot of these benefits speak to it, and they may not be able to quantifiable, but it is important to acknowledge them in your business case. Next slide, please. So funding plan, I'll just cover this briefly because again, have a whole presentation tomorrow. But as you're developing your funding plan, you want to look at kind of the different sources of funds and how well they fit into your plan. So of course you have your kind of direct purchasing, looking at your reserve situation, your reserves meant for your capital plan and your building, based on your building condition assessment. There's a lot of times where stuff in your building condition assessment doesn't necessarily cover new innovations. I think building automation systems was a good example. When they first came onto the landscape, no one was planning for them, but they quickly, became an important aspect of really kind of how you manage your building. So important to look at your reserves and how well covered you are and how much you're going to draw from them. Also, another aspect of your reserve planning is that even if you're using some of these other options like funding programs or loans, sometimes those require a 20-25% equity contribution. So where's that coming from? Is that coming from your reserves? Part of your business planning, of course, is always looking at your incentives and funding programs. And so again, I do go into more of this. Your incentives tend to be utility incentives or government incentives for specific prescriptive measures, or we're starting to move towards more performance-based measures, so outcome-based. And then the funding programs. We have a lot of funding programs in the marketplace right now that are focused on different things. Some are focused on carbon reduction, some are focused on energy reduction, some are focused on capacity development. So having an understanding of the landscape. But the incentives and funding program is also where working with an expert service provider can really help, because it's really, it's their job to stay on top of what's available. And it can be a lot of work to stay on top of what's available. So lean into your service providers when it comes to leveraging those programs. Your institutional loans is your traditional kind of bank financing, whether it's mortgage or unsecured loans. We're starting to see many more products come out of the institutions that are specifically focused on carbon reductions or energy efficiency improvements. Finally is an interesting tool on the landscape, which is the community bonds and crowdfunding. So this is really great when you have a lot of social capital. So you've got a large community that supports your mission, and you're looking to fund your retrofit or even just the equity component. You can sometimes turn that social capital into financial capital through the issuance of a community bond or some sort of crowdfunding mechanism. But you should recognize that there is a cost to raising that kind of capital. Even though the capital itself tends to come much more cheaply than the other sources, there is a cost to raising it, of course. Your leases is your traditional rentals. Operating leases don't really exist anymore in most cases. and your capital lease. And then you get into your performance contracting. So most service providers will know what performance contracting is, made popular by the ESCO community, the energy service companies. And historically, that has been really driven in the institutional MUSH, municipalities, university schools, and hospitals. That's where you have a building owner and energy service company and a lender. The energy service company does the technical work, provides a guarantee on the savings for the life of the project potentially. And the lender lends the capital to the building owner to pay the service provider, and the building owner basically pays principal and interest over time. If there's a reduction in savings, they go after the ESCO and claim on the guarantee. That has worked really well in the institutional segment. It's a little more complex, and it does work for large building portfolios. Difficult to do on kind of like an individual building scale, because there's some added kind of risk management and costs that go into that one. And then new on the landscape is these new emerging financial mechanisms. So we see local improvement charge financing, which in the States is called PACE financing. So their municipality will start a program where you can borrow low-cost capital, and instead of taking on the loan yourself, it goes on your property tax bill. And what's great about that is, people say that they buy and sell their homes every 5 to 7 years. So, why would I take out a loan for 15 years when I'm not going to be in my home for that long? Well, this way the loan stays with the property and not you personally. So it's a great way to tie the benefits to the property that is receiving those benefits, essentially. And then newer on the landscape, which is energy as a service or efficiency as a service, lighting as a service, heating and cooling as a service. And it is kind of the next evolution of performance contracting, where it is kind of a full outsourcing of your infrastructure, where you work with a service provider, a developer like Efficiency Capital. This is essentially what we do. And they develop, they fund, they operate your building infrastructure, whether it's solar panels or HVAC. And then you pay them as a service, whether it's per kilowatt hour or per BTU or for lighting levels. And this allows you to basically focus your capital and your operations on your core mission, while letting basically a trusted expert partner take care of your infrastructure and be incentivized to do so over the long term. Next slide, please. I won't spend a lot of time on the risk. Again, I've got a lot of kind of text here that I'm not going to read through. The slides will be available if you want to think more deeply on it. But you do need to think about your risks in terms of the process. So the risk management process, you have your business case development and all the information gathering. When you move into implementation, there's some implementation risk. And a lot of that happens in the construction phase. Are you going to be able to manage the pricing? Is there going to be change orders? Those kind of things. There are really well-established contracting mechanisms to deal with implementation risk, turnkey, fixed price, for example. And that's kind of well known in the kind of property management and asset management world. And so, definitely, again, rely on your consultants, your professional services, your lawyers and such, and advisors to understand that piece. But then there's the ongoing risk. And I think that's where we don't spend enough time. Energy efficiency retrofits has been plagued by many stories of building owners trying some sort of new technology or new solution, and then not feeling like they really achieved the results they were told they were going to achieve, whether that's a certain amount of energy reduction or whatever those outcomes were. And a lot of times it's simply because they didn't really have an effective performance management plan that included monitoring and verification and kind of the continual reporting around that. And managing that piece is really, really critical. And it's critical not only for your business planning and make sure that you achieve your outcomes, but it's also critical because of human behavior. So much can change based on how you use your building and how your occupants or your tenants use your building. If you're doing a retrofit and you're planning that, you're going to be providing some, new heating and cooling, but your tenants always have their windows open. How does that fit into your risk management planning? How are you actually modifying that behavior or managing that behavior? So that's a really critical piece in your business planning and your ongoing risk management. If you want to skip 2 slides, I think I already spoke to this one. Yeah. And finally, the tell a good story. So I mentioned, how this all comes together in telling a good story. I've got an example up here that I've pulled from our Wood Green case study, and you'll hear about the Wood Green project. But, we did, I want to say it was almost a year of planning, not just planning, but, building condition assessments, energy audits, scenario analysis. And when we came to actually pull the business case together, we were saying, okay, what are the key messages and top level kind of, ideas and concepts we want people to understand, regardless of what discipline they're from, so that they can communicate that and they can kind of repeat that storytelling. So for us, there was kind of key aspects. There was the financial, strategic, operational, the tenant piece, of course, and the sustainability. And on the financial, it was understanding how we're leveraging the different sources of capital. So, Wood Green had a $1.3 million reserve contribution to this project, but by working with external capital providers, they were able to turn that into a $3.4 million project. And that generated $6 million of expense benefits and $6 million of improvements to their long-term reserves. So it was kind of like a 1 to 3 to 6, and kind of easy, bite-sized message to come across. And then we supported it with this nice graph you see in the top right, which basically says, okay, we've got this 30-year plan. There's going to be these energy and maintenance savings that increase over time, efficiency capital, and the City of Toronto. So in this case, we were leveraging a specialized program from the City of Toronto, where they offer a 20-year energy efficiency loan, often unsecured, but paid for from the energy savings. And so the first 10 years, those energy savings were largely going to pay back efficiency capital and the City of Toronto loan. After year 10, City of efficiency capital drops off, and Wood Green starts to enjoy the majority of the savings while paying off the loan. And then from year 20 to 30, Wood Green enjoys 100% of those savings. Through this kind of financial modeling and the structure, Wood Green was actually able to set up their capital contribution from their reserve as a loan to the project, which then gets replenished and at a kind of a concessionary interest rate. So that was really compelling for the financial managers to understand. The graph in the bottom was another example of a scenario analysis where we looked at the reserve fund position before and after the energy efficiency retrofit, so that they can understand their long-term liabilities. Some of these, like the financial models behind these graphs, were really quite complex, but we were able to bring them into a nice, compelling story that can be grasped by many different people and stakeholders and be communicated more broadly. So again, telling the good story and repeating that good story is really critical for the ongoing success and buy-in of your project. So I think, is that my last slide? It is. So that takes me through my presentation. Are we doing questions or?
Yes. I have 2 questions for you, Matt, from our audience. So the first one is, are there any statistics about reducing tenant turnover or or rental premiums after an energy efficiency retrofit?
So there are some, and if you maybe want to follow up with that email, we can kind of provide you with some of the sources to go look at, and those are being updated. Unfortunately, most of those what I would call validated statistics are more in the new build, in the green building space, where there was a measurable like a LEED rating or something like that, which makes it easier to generate those statistics because they're an identified asset in the marketplace. There's a LEED building versus a non-LEED building, and also generally makes it easier to compare. Energy efficiency retrofits can be quite diverse in terms of what you do. Are you doing an LED, an LED replacement, or are you doing a deep retrofit that has improved indoor air quality? So the quality of the statistics is not quite to the level of the new buildings, but we are starting to see some of those numbers, and particularly a great place to look for that is through the insurance and reinsurers, particularly the reinsurers. as they've started to come out with new products in the marketplace that are adjusted, so insurance premiums and just kind of insurance products, those are all based on analysis of what they see the risk and improvement of value. But again, if you want to follow up, we can send you some places to go look.
Great, thanks. Next question. Does Efficiency Capital look to finance the entire retrofit project, or have you ever focused on one high cost component that would otherwise have been excluded by the building owner?
Yes and yes. So we are highly flexible in what we do, but essentially our model is we pay for things up front and get paid out of performance over time. That performance can be energy savings, it could be water savings, it could be GHG savings, it could be lighting levels. But the idea is whether it's a single measure intervention or a multi-measure intervention, that's not a problem. From a building, so that's Efficiency Capital hat. If I was to put on my presenter as building the business case, I would be wary of doing a single measure without evaluating the opportunity for more. Just in terms of providing the best net present value and the best outcome for the building owner. And so what do I mean by that? I was giving a low flow toilet example to somebody the other day where toilets can pay for your boilers. Again, telling a good story, good way to summarize this. But so toilets paying for your boilers, what does that actually mean? If you're moving from, a 6 liter flush to a 3 liter flush, you're getting a 50% reduction in your water. Let's say it costs you $200,000 to do that retrofit. You get $100,000 in water saving every year. There's a 2-year simple payback. If you were to finance that project through Efficiency Capital or someone else, then maybe it's a 3-year contract. But I would say, why do a 3-year contract? Why not do a 10-year contract or a 15-year contract? If you have $100,000 of water savings every year, that's a stream of benefits that you could work with somebody like Efficiency Capital to bring forward on a net present value. And then you've got a little extra capital that you can go maybe use that extra capital to pay for your boilers, which, the energy savings on boilers, are not huge. Natural gas is cheap. So, are there ways to combine the benefits of a single measure with other measures? The other reason why I say that, the lens, is there's some really interesting financial programs. And again, I'll talk more about this tomorrow, but the FCM, for example, has a really great program where you can do energy efficiency retrofits. You get low interest, long-term loans. Minimum reduction is 30%, and to even access the loan. But the cool thing is that let's say you do a 50% reduction, you can get up to 50% of this loan forgiven. So this is largely for social housing providers, this program. If you're a for-profit housing provider, there's other mechanisms out there. But if you're a not-for-profit social housing provider, this is a really neat program because you can include non-energy interventions in your bundle of measures. So let's say you have, you do a heat pump retrofit, you get to 50% reduction, but you also want to throw in, upgrading your kitchens. You can put that into the package and still get the total loan package cut in half because this one measure is getting your 50% reduction. So looking for kind of combined value benefits and stacking them is really critical from a building owner's point of view. Having said that, once that analysis is done, happy to also just look at, a single measure intervention.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. That was a great